Imagine uncovering a fossil so powerful, so groundbreaking, that it could rewrite the story of human evolution. A fossil that promises to reveal the missing link between ape and man. Now imagine that same discovery turning out to be nothing more than an elaborate lie, one that deceived the world's greatest scientists for more than 40 years. Welcome to the channel, where history's secrets, mysteries, and deceptions are laid bare. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and join us, because today's story is one of the most jaw-dropping scandals in the history of science. The Piltdown Man, the man who never was. The year is 1912, the setting, the quiet English countryside of Sussex, in a place called Piltdown, a village of calm, green fields, stone churches, and winding rivers. To the outside world, nothing extraordinary ever happens here, but that would soon change. Enter Charles Dawson, a lawyer by profession, but an amateur archaeologist by passion. Dawson was a man desperate for recognition. For years, he had been collecting fossils, artifacts, and curiosities, hoping for the discovery that would immortalize his name in history. One day, he wrote an excited letter to Arthur Smith Woodward, the head of geology at the British Museum of Natural History. Dawson claimed he had found something remarkable, fragments of a skull dug out from the gravel pits of Piltdown. If true, this was no ordinary fossil. It was something that could shake the very foundations of evolutionary science. To understand the storm that was about to erupt, we must first understand the context of the time. Ever since Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species in 1859, the world had been consumed with questions about human evolution. Where did we come from? What did our ancestors look like? And perhaps the biggest mystery of all, was there a missing link, a half-ape, half-human creature that connected us to the primates? By the early 20th century, scientists had already unearthed human fossils in places like Germany, Neanderthals, and Java Man. But the British scientific community felt left behind. They had no ancient fossil to call their own. Some national pride was at stake. So when Charles Dawson announced his discovery in England's green countryside, it felt almost too perfect. Could Britain finally have its own ancient ancestor? On December 18, 1912, Dawson and Woodward presented their find before the Geological Society of London. The audience was packed with scholars, reporters, and curious minds. Before them lay the reconstructed pieces, a skull that looked remarkably human. The combination was extraordinary. The creature, later nicknamed Piltdown Man, seemed to be exactly what everyone had been searching for. The evolutionary bridge between apes and humans, but with a jawbone that seemed ape-like. Woodward and Dawson claimed it was at least 500,000 years old. The scientific world erupted in excitement. Headlines across Britain declared, "The missing link found." But not everyone was convinced. Some experts whispered, "Why did the skull look so modern while the jaw looked so primitive? Why were there no other fossils around the site to support the find?" A few scientists suggested caution, but in an age when Britain wanted to showcase its own contribution to human evolution, the voices of doubt were quickly drowned out. For the next 4 decades, textbooks, museums, and classrooms proudly displayed Piltdown Man as evidence of Britain's role in the great human story. Yet, beneath the surface, cracks in the story were beginning to show. What no one realized at the time was that the Piltdown discovery wasn't a treasure of evolution at all. It was a carefully constructed illusion. The skull was human. The jaw was from an orangutan. The teeth had been filed down to look more human, and the bones had been chemically stained to appear ancient. It was a fraud, a deliberate deception that would fool the world's greatest scientists for more than 40 years. And this is just the beginning. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into the strange characters behind the Piltdown hoax. The ambitious lawyer, Charles Dawson, the skeptical scientists who tried to raise the alarm, and the eventual exposure of the truth in 1953, when the greatest scientific fraud of the century was finally revealed. But before we continue, if you're fascinated by tales of mystery, deception, and hidden history, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit like button, because what comes next will leave you questioning not just the Piltdown Man, but the very nature of science itself. A single discovery can change the world. But what happens when the world wants to believe a lie more than the truth? After that fateful presentation in December 1912, the world of science was abuzz. The fossil fragments from Piltdown were hailed as one of the greatest discoveries of the century. The British press could hardly contain its pride. Newspapers called it the first Englishman. Cartoons depicted a primitive-looking caveman dressed in tweed and a bowler hat, sipping tea, the ultimate blend of ancient ancestry and British identity. For decades, the scientific community had longed for an ancient ancestor to rival the fossils of Germany and Asia. Now, thanks to Dawson and Woodward, Britain had its own prehistoric star. The timing couldn't have been more convenient. Early in the 20th century, the theory of evolution was still controversial in many circles. Religious groups resisted Darwin's ideas, and even scientists debated the details of how humans had evolved. The Piltdown Man seemed to answer those questions. Its human-like skull and ape-like jaw suggested a creature that was both primitive and advanced, a step neatly placed on the ladder of human evolution. And sometimes, in science, that can be dangerous. It fit the story people wanted to hear. Museums displayed replicas of the fossil. Textbooks illustrated its features. Generations of students grew up learning that the Piltdown Man was their ancient ancestor. Even internationally, Piltdown captured attention. German scientists grudgingly admitted Britain's triumph. American universities taught it as fact. The fossil was given an official scientific name, Eoanthropus dawsoni, Dawson's Dawn Man, in honor of Charles Dawson, the man who claimed to have found it. Dawson's dream had come true. He was finally a name remembered in history, or so it seemed. Not everyone was convinced. From the very beginning, some scientists had raised their eyebrows. The French paleontologist Marcellin Boule examined the jaw and noticed something odd. Its teeth looked suspiciously like those of a modern ape. He suggested that the jaw might not belong to the skull at all. Other critics pointed out that no other fossils resembling Piltdown had ever been found anywhere else. Evolution doesn't usually happen in isolation. So why was Piltdown Man alone in the fossil record? But these doubts were largely brushed aside. The majority of scientists, perhaps eager to embrace a British fossil hero, accepted Piltdown without question. Over the years, new fossils were discovered across the world, from Africa to Asia. Many of them painted a very different picture of human evolution. But whenever these new finds didn't match Piltdown, scientists often twisted their interpretations to fit the Piltdown model. Instead of questioning the oddity of Piltdown, they adjusted everything else around it. This is the power of belief. Once an idea takes root, it can shape the way we see the world, even in science, where skepticism is supposed to reign supreme. In 1916, just 4 years after unveiling Piltdown Man, Charles Dawson died suddenly from septicemia. To his admirers, he was remembered as the man who had given Britain its ancient ancestor. He never lived to see his legacy questioned. But in hindsight, his death came at a convenient time. If Dawson had lived longer, perhaps he would have been pressured to produce more evidence. Perhaps his role in the hoax would have been exposed much earlier. Instead, he died a hero in the eyes of his peers, leaving behind one of the greatest scientific deceptions of all time. For decades, Piltdown remained unchallenged. Scientists who doubted it often stayed quiet, reluctant to be dismissed as radicals or troublemakers. And the hoax continued to thrive in the very place it had been born, the halls of British science, where pride, nationalism, and tradition made it untouchable. But as the decades rolled on, more and more fossils from Africa began to emerge. The Tong child in 1924, Australopithecus fossils later, and many more. These finds showed a very different picture of human origins, one that directly contradicted the Piltdown story. The tension was building. By the 1940s, whispers grew louder. Scientists began asking, why do none of these other fossils resemble Piltdown Man? Why is Piltdown such an outlier? The answer was simple. Because Piltdown was never real. And soon, science would finally have the tools to prove it. In the next part of our journey, we'll uncover how Piltdown's carefully constructed illusion began to collapse. We'll follow the trail of scientists armed with new dating methods, sharper skepticism, and the courage to challenge decades of accepted truth. Stay with us, because the unraveling of Piltdown Man is as thrilling as any detective story you've ever heard. For 40 years, the Piltdown Man sat on a pedestal, celebrated as Britain's greatest contribution to human history. But beneath the surface, the cracks were already forming, and when the truth finally broke through, it shook the very foundations of science. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, more fossils were discovered around the world. In Africa, scientists unearthed the Tong child, the fossilized skull of a young Australopithecus, discovered in 1924. Later finds revealed more ape-like ancestors, showing clear evidence that early humans came from Africa, not England. But there was a problem. None of these fossils looked anything like Piltdown Man. Piltdown's large, human-like skull didn't match the smaller, more primitive skulls found in Africa. Its ape-like jaw didn't match the human-like jaws of those other fossils. The contradiction grew too big to ignore. Was Piltdown Man a rare outlier, or was something more troubling going on? Some scientists began to whisper their concerns more openly. In the 1930s, the German anthropologist Franz Weidenreich closely examined the Piltdown remains. He noticed strange scratches on the teeth, scratches that looked like they had been deliberately filed down. Others pointed out that the fossil's jaw didn't fit properly with its skull. It looked forced, unnatural. And yet, the Piltdown fossil was so iconic, so deeply entrenched in the scientific imagination, that no one dared to officially call it a fraud. It was easier to bend other discoveries to fit Piltdown than to question Piltdown itself. By the 1940s, the scientific world was changing. New techniques in dating fossils were being developed. Instead of relying on appearances and assumptions, researchers could now test the very age of bones using chemistry. One such method was fluorine analysis. Fossils buried in the ground absorb fluorine from surrounding groundwater over time. The longer a bone has been buried, the more fluorine it contains. This test could finally determine whether the Piltdown bones were truly hundreds of thousands of years old. And so, in 1949, scientists began testing the Piltdown fossils. The results were shocking. The skull and jaw that had supposedly been 500,000 years old turned out to be only a few thousand years old at most. Even worse, the jaw wasn't ancient at all. It belonged to a relatively recent orangutan. The teeth had been carefully filed down to look human. The bones had been stained with iron and chromium to give them an aged, fossil-like appearance. The grand secret of Piltdown was finally exposed. It was a hoax. In 1953, the truth became public. The world was stunned. The fossil that had dominated textbooks, museums, and scientific debates for over 40 years was nothing more than a fake, a carefully crafted illusion. The embarrassment was monumental. How could so many brilliant scientists have been fooled for so long? The exposure of Piltdown was more than the downfall of a fraud. It was a humiliation for the entire scientific establishment. The next question was inevitable. Who had created this deception? The obvious suspect was Charles Dawson, the amateur archaeologist who had discovered the fossils. His death in 1916 had shielded him from suspicion for decades. But when researchers began looking into his past, they found a disturbing pattern. Dawson had been linked to several other suspicious discoveries of artifacts and fossils, many of which were later considered questionable or fake. It seemed likely that Dawson had been the mastermind. Perhaps he wanted fame. Perhaps he craved acceptance into the world of elite science. But others were implicated too. Could Woodward, the respected British Museum geologist, really have been fooled so easily? Did he turn a blind eye? Some even suggested he may have been complicit. And then there were wild theories. Maybe it was Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, a French Jesuit priest who had assisted at the dig, or Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, who lived nearby and had an interest in fossils. Some theorized he might have staged the hoax as revenge against scientists who mocked his spiritual beliefs. The truth remains uncertain. To this day, no one knows with absolute certainty who crafted the Piltdown forgery. The Piltdown Man wasn't just a fraud. It was a mirror reflecting human weakness, the hunger for fame, the pride of nations, the desire to believe in something that fits our expectations. Scientists weren't merely fooled by clever forgery. They were blinded by their own biases, by the story they wanted to be true. And for 40 years, that blindness shaped the course of science itself. In the next and final part, we'll explore the aftermath of the Piltdown scandal. We'll see how it reshaped the way science investigates the past, how it restored Africa as the cradle of humanity, and how the Piltdown fraud, despite its shame, taught lessons that made science stronger. When the truth came out, the world was stunned. But the Piltdown hoax did more than just embarrass science. It changed the way we search for the truth. The announcement that Piltdown Man was a forgery sent shockwaves through the scientific community. For over 4 decades, the fossil had been treated as a cornerstone of human evolution. Now, suddenly, that cornerstone had crumbled into dust. Museums quickly removed Piltdown displays. Textbooks were rewritten. Professors who had once proudly lectured about Eoanthropus dawsoni now faced humiliation. Science had been fooled, and the world knew it. But with embarrassment came something else, a powerful lesson. Piltdown Man exposed a fundamental truth that even the brightest minds can be deceived if they allow their hopes, biases, and national pride to cloud their judgment. From that moment onward, science became more cautious, more skeptical, more rigorous. Claims of new fossils or revolutionary discoveries would no longer be accepted on appearances alone. They would be tested, retested, and tested again with every new tool science could provide. Peer review became stricter. Fossils were subjected to advanced chemical dating, X-rays, and microscopic analysis. No single person's word was enough to sway the world anymore. In a strange way, the Piltdown hoax, though shameful, ultimately strengthened science. It forced scientists to be better. The collapse of Piltdown also had another effect. It cleared the way for the African fossils to shine. For years, the African finds, like the Tong child, Australopithecus africanus, and later, Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, had been viewed with suspicion because they didn't match Piltdown. But once Piltdown was exposed as fake, the African fossils made far more sense. The evidence became overwhelming. Humanity's roots were not in England's green fields, but in the valleys and savannas of Africa. This revelation reshaped the entire story of human evolution, and it remains the foundation of what we know today. Even today, the Piltdown hoax remains an unsolved crime. Most evidence points to Charles Dawson. His history of shady discoveries and his craving for fame make him the prime suspect. But there are still questions. Did he act alone? Did others help him stain and shape the bones? Did respected scientists knowingly turn a blind eye because Piltdown was too convenient to doubt? Theories abound, but the truth may never be fully known. The Piltdown Man remains not only a fraud, but a mystery in itself. Piltdown teaches us something bigger than science. It shows how easily humans can be blinded by pride, by desire, by the hunger to believe. Britain wanted its own fossil ancestor. Dawson wanted fame. Scientists wanted the missing link to finally appear. And together, these desires created one of the greatest illusions in history. It's a reminder that truth is not always what we want it to be. Truth demands patience, discipline, and the courage to question even our deepest beliefs. Though it began as a hoax, Piltdown ended as a triumph of science. Because in the end, it was science itself that exposed the fraud. The tools of chemistry, the discipline of skepticism, the persistence of questioning. All these eventually tore down the illusion. And that's the beauty of science. It corrects itself. It may stumble, it may be misled, but in the end, truth has a way of breaking through. Today, the Piltdown Man sits in museums, not as proof of human evolution, but as proof of human fallibility. Visitors gaze at the stained bones and filed down teeth, not with awe, but with a mixture of wonder and caution. It stands as a warning that even the most convincing story can be a lie, and that the pursuit of truth requires vigilance, always. So, the next time you hear about a discovery that claims to change everything, remember Piltdown. Remember how the world wanted to believe, and how that desire blinded it to reality. And remember this, truth survives. Lies eventually collapse. This was the story of the Piltdown Man, the greatest scientific hoax of the 20th century. If you've made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person who hungers for hidden history. untold mysteries and the strange, secret stories that shaped our world. So, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and share it with friends who love history and mystery as much as you do, because here, the past is never just the past. It's a puzzle, waiting to be solved.